Hello and welcome to the second conversation. If you haven't seen the first conversation, you can click right here in the notification bar. I am inviting experts to give us their opinion on the Edelman Trust Barometer. And I am so excited right now to give you Luke Zimmer. Hello, how are you?
Hey, Benia. Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. And thank you so much for taking a little bit of time out of your day to talk about something honestly kind of depressing, but we're going to do it. We're going to fix this.
Yeah, I mean, we can't fix everything, but we'll try to fix something, or at least put some solutions out into the world.
So what I'd love if you could do is just kind of start by explaining a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, so I am a consultant primarily for nonprofits and associations, and I help them create and manage online spaces for their members to get to know each other and to share ideas and information. It's a really interesting field because I get to work with a bunch of different industries because there tends to be an association for just about everything, and their primary goal is connecting people, and they've really leaned into the online space, especially with the pandemic and stuff like that. So I did not think that I would ever be able to make a career out of online communities, but here we are. Yeah, it's been fun to watch the industry grow. And I've been in it since 2013. So just past my 10-year mark. I'm in the 11th year of doing this stuff now.
It sounds like you have a lot of history and background, especially when it comes to nonprofit organizations. So I would love your opinion and your perspective on how the Edelman Trust Barometer for 2024 has really impacted your industry sector. We'll riff on it a bit. Sound good?
Yeah, you had mentioned this in your video, Venia, and this one really caught my attention too in terms of thinking about the community industry and specifically thinking about the role of nonprofits and associations in communicating the work of scientists. In general, scientists and people's peers are the two most trusted cohorts of folks in this study. And I think that there's a really interesting intersection and opportunity there, particularly for associations who are representing folks like scientists, to essentially help them better communicate these kinds of innovations, to help get people bought into and embracing these innovations. You know, in particular with things like gene-based medicine, there are a lot of associations out there that represent scientists and medical professionals who are leading the charge in terms of developing these things. And there's a clear gap here in terms of confidence. And that gap right there is what I feel could be addressed by an association, and in particular, leveraging online community to create spaces for people to have actual dialogues with these scientists. And I think that's one aspect of how associations think about online communities that maybe they haven't tapped into necessarily yet, in that, you know, they're really actively serving their members and creating spaces for their members to deliberate amongst each other, but there's less emphasis on creating forums for those members to actually communicate with the public. So yeah, I think that was the number one thing that struck me about this report was, you know, these gaps in confidence are things that can be addressed by organizations whose role is to essentially represent, you know, these industries.
I think you kind of hit the nail on the head as far as the way that nonprofits can start to increase their trust number again in step with innovation. Because there is this dialectical tension, right? This tension between, I want more firm science. I don't want as much pandering or ideology or propaganda, right? From these audiences that are really struggling with understanding the way that innovation is proceeding forward. But on the other side, there's also this notion of saying, hey, I get that science is important and I want it, but at the same time, I don't want scientists and businesses controlling that conversation. And I think there's this really wonderful middle ground that an NGO is really capable of striking when it comes to facilitating that.
I completely agree with you. And I think that one of the indicators of that from the Trust Barometer itself is the standing of NGOs, nonprofits, and, you know, things like associations. You know, there's clearly trust for them to leverage there. and compared to something like a government, regulatory body or traditional media, or even social media, the landscape that people are in, there's so much noise that people can't sift through using social media. And so they're relying on things like Google search results and things like that. NGOs are also, part of that social media landscape. And there's a role that they play in terms of, building that trust within a social media platform, and it's really up to us to kind of to chime that bell and to be like, hey, there are ways that we can manage this stuff, and there are things that we can do, as long as we convince these organizations that we're working for that it's the right thing to do. And it's really up to us to, like you said, pump the brakes and think for a second, how do we innovate while also not completely ruining the world?
Completely ruining the world. Yeah. Leak for sure. I do agree, though. Everyone likes to blame social media because everyone's gotten the ability to say anything they want on the internet. And social media has become such a great vehicle for that process. And individuals are feeling more and more isolated because of their social platforms. Everyone is very quick to call out social media. It's a big thing. But I think what a lot of people miss is that social media is first and foremost a tech company. And also the way that our technology has attempted to solve being together in our communities is based almost entirely off of a very long history of community breaking down. When we talk about like the suburban neighborhood, when we talk about the reduction of housing, and the movement away from housing and business being in the same sector. When we talk about the way that third spaces like bars and other things have become grossly monetized, you start to think, oh, well, we lost all of our traditional methods of connecting and maintaining a communal structure in a physical world. Technology found a technological solution to solving the problem of us breaking down our physical communities. And we've discovered that ain't it. That's just not going to work. And NGOs have to be that bridge between business innovation, media covering it, and the implementation of the public.
It's no small feat because, so many of these classic avenues of maintaining community, have been broken down. I feel like there's a very clear shift, though. This isn't like statistical data at all, but I feel like at least the people that I speak to anecdotally, I think people don't necessarily realize how much these algorithms like actually affect what we see and when we see it and where we go on the internet. So in this slide, folks are telling us where it is that they're getting their news and their information. And even though people don't trust social media, it's still the second one on the list, which that's fun. But first on the list are online searches. Like when you hear about search engine optimization, that's people who have jobs literally chasing the Google search algorithm and trying to figure out how it works and getting your stuff to appear on search results. And this is the number one way that folks are getting their information. And that indicates to me a disconnect between how people actually understand how these online searches work and thinking that when they go to Google, that it's just a blank search bar and there isn't any kind of influence on what it is that you're going to find when you search for something.
Oh, this happens so much on TikTok. 6 years ago, that's not how we used Google. We were more robotic when communicating with the robot that was Google. But now we trust it so much to use natural language in that search bar. And Google is really struggling to deliver the right results at the right time. Most people aren't. They just move forward with the Google search.
Yeah. And I still have it on my list to read, Filter World by Kyle Chayka. There's just so much of things that we think are like core to our personality that are being like very subtly and actively influenced by these interactions that we have, not just with each other online, but with the technology itself. It's understandable why people have reservations about innovation, quote unquote.
How amusing that is the going term for the Edelman Trust Barometer, innovation in peril. Real quick, is there another section of the report that you would like to pop through to?
you'd mentioned this one in your video. Like this particular slide just so clearly jumps out, not only as like an opportunity for online community, but community in general with any of these spheres of influence. Like just seeing that this is one of the top 3 issues, that literally they're saying, here are concerns, let us ask questions. The answer, at least for me and for you and me as like online community people, for anybody in the industry, they see this and they're automatically like, why aren't you creating spaces for people to have a dialogue with your organization about their concerns like this? Totally understand why organizations don't, on the flip side, because it's such a messy process. Like there are so many constituents that you have to not only keep track of, but actually know that they're your constituents. And, there's just so much work that has to go into identifying those first place, but then to create a space that they'll actually go to and actually ask those questions. People always want to be heard. They always want to have the opportunity to ask questions, but when you actually give them the opportunity, it's a question of how much they actually care. And that's where the rubber hits the road. And they're like, oh, well, I do want you to listen to me, but I don't actually care that much. So
this is not an unclear result. This is resoundingly clear. 4 out of 5 people in every single sector are wanting more time on deliberation and things better spent. But then you think about like, why exactly is innovation in the business sector so out of step? We've spent 20 years now in Silicon Valley and 40 years creating global supply chains where we say, move fast and break things.
Yeah, there's so much in our society in terms of like being hyper capitalist. So there's always going to be that segment. And even if it's not necessarily a monetary reward, there's some folks like the drive to discover new things is a core part of the human experience. Like humans are endlessly curious, and we're gonna discover things, and people are gonna do things that surprise and astound us, and quite frankly can scare us because and it's tough too because all of this technology, it exists because of that drive for innovation. My partner, his dad works for the government, and his favorite thing to say is that the government is there to purposefully slow things down and to give us an opportunity to deliberate and to think about these things and to give everybody an opportunity in the form of a vote to ultimately choose whether or not something happens. And I feel like the great irony of that is that, government has slowed down to the point where people feel like it's not doing anything at all. And business is innovating to the point where people feel like it's moving at light speed. And there's no evidence for anybody that those two things are going to be working together in a significant way. And that's another thing that's mentioned as one of their data points too, is that people want to see more cooperation between government and business to essentially mediate, the power of innovation and the speed of innovation.
Let's zoom out, right? Let's look at the history, because the Edelman Trust Barometer is one of the longest running, regular, consistent, really high volume reports that we can really get about industry context. When we talk about the law of numbers, right? The bigger a database gets, the more accurate its results are. The Edelman's Trust Barometer has successfully made something social scientific into something that we can genuinely actually quantify. So I'm kind of curious, given the fact that this report is 24 years old, what you think of the general timeline and its trends.
The trends are definitely interesting, especially when you think about 2 or 3 years ago. Business is the most trusted of the sectors, but it wasn't that much before that business was clearly losing trust. 2009, during the height of the financial crisis, which I think, it's very interesting to see that, so much as we want to think of this as predictive, it's also kind of reactive in terms of like whatever's happened. That's why people, are feeling that particular way. And I think it makes sense with all of the conversation around artificial intelligence and, reading that there's a 1 in 10 chance that AI could literally end humanity compared to a 1 in a million chance that we'll get hit by an asteroid. But so, I mean, it totally makes sense that you see those kinds of shifts. Like we look at 2011, business must partner with government to regain its trust. And we see similar things in this year's report in that government needs to partner with business to regain trust, or to build trust. And so much of this, when you kind of zoom out, is ultimately about how do we create balance, and how do we have institutions in place that can essentially be checks on these other things that that we see, like innovation in the business space. This year it's clear that we need to check on that in some way, shape, or form in the form of government. And inevitably, though, the government will overreact, and then we'll see a backlash to that, and there will be distrust in government as a result of that or something. The thing that's most reassuring to me about this, though, is that this has been happening for 24 years, that there is this much data, and that these are the kinds of things that if we take the time to study them and to think about them, we don't have to be scared of them. We can use this information to our advantage and to make the world a better place.
Yeah, I absolutely agree, unequivocally. Really influence. But it's fun to look at that timeline and think we were in precisely the reverse in 2008. And when government fell, quote unquote, in 2012, it's just fascinating to think that over the course of a single decade, businesses outstep with innovation happened so fast. And I start to wonder if it's possible for us to claw back from that over the course of the next 5 to 10 years. So even though it's such a bleak report, I feel like it's doable. It seems impossible, but there is a precedent to be said, right?
I think there is. And yeah, there's no one thing that any one of us could do to ever solve this problem. It's always going to take a community, and it's always going to take people thinking about it from different angles, having conversations like this, to have any influence on those things. Who knows what's going to happen with AI innovation technology? I mean, it's going to go wild, but yeah, hopefully we live through it. And if we do, there will be folks like you who are out there in the world trying to help us become better connected as actual humans, not just faces on a screen. So I appreciate that.
Absolutely. I agree. And thank you as well for taking the time out of your day in order to provide some much needed and important context from an NGO perspective about what our next steps really are and how this should look as far as the nonprofit community really improving this.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
All right. Thank you so much to everyone who watched as well. Keep in mind, there are going to be a few more of these because this is not something that I feel comfortable really covering myself. So if you have any feedback on the Edelman Trust Barometer, or you would like to be interviewed with your opinions as well, pop down into the comments, let me know, and shoot me an email at venia@sociallyconstructed.online.